I was 19 the first time I called it, and I did it for the stupidest reason possible. I didn't want my brother to die. You tell yourself grief makes you rational. It doesn't. It makes you porous. The doctors called it an aneurysm. One moment Miguel was laughing in the kitchen. The next he was on the tiles with his eyes rolled back and blood in the corner of his mouth. My mother hit her knees and started praying in machine gun Spanish. My father just froze. I rode in the ambulance with him. The siren howled. The paramedic shouted numbers, and somewhere between home and the hospital, I decided that if there was anything, anyone, listening on the other side of the dark, I'd pay whatever price it wanted. Someone must have heard me, because the next morning I found the book. It wasn't an ancient leather tome on a pedestal. It was a cheap paperback on the occult and spirituality shelf of a second-hand shop I'd never noticed before, squeezed between horoscopes and conspiracy trash. No title on the spine, just a sigil stamped into the faded cover. When I opened it, the text shifted like my eyes couldn't quite decide what language it was. But the diagrams were clear enough. Circle, names, blood. I stole it. I walked past the old man at the counter with the book under my jacket and the certainty that if anything was going to damn me, it had already started the night Miguel hit the floor. The ritual didn't ask for much. A little cut on the palm. A few words that tasted like rust and cold water. A promise. I offer what I am when you ask what you'll ask, if you grant what I beg now. Miguel survived the surgery he wasn't supposed to survive. The doctors called it a miracle. My mother called it the Virgin. My father called it luck. I knew better. I burned the book in the alley behind our building. The pages screamed when they went up, high and thin like a kettle left too long. Afterward, I tried very hard to pretend I had made a bargain with no one, that nothing had listened, that my brother's laughter drifting down the hall at night wasn't bought and paid for. Then life moved on. Years passed. I joined the wrong group at the right time, got pulled into an investigation as local help, and proved I could see and believe things most people edit out. Someone in a collar and someone in a suit put my name on a list. I ended up working for a branch of the church that doesn't exist on any organizational chart, a division that handles the kind of phenomena the press likes to call miracles until they get too ugly. They trained me to recognize relics, sigils, infestations. They taught me prayers nobody says in public anymore. They gave me protocols, silver, iron, blessed oil, and paperwork in triplicate. They never asked if I had called something before I ever walked into their building. I never volunteered. 8 years after the ritual, I was standing in front of a crypt door in a mountain village. 2 hours from Rome, with a sealed order in my pocket and a team behind me. And the thing I'd summoned in a cheap apartment bedroom decided it was time to collect. The assignment looked simple on paper. A monastic community in the Abruzzi had reported phenomena beneath their chapel. Voices during the office that didn't match any of the men present. Cold spots, a stone that bled when moved. A friendly bishop flagged it up the chain, not to the local diocese, but to my people. We ran it through our filters, checked for hoaxes, mental illness, local legends. Enough red flags lit up that the decision came down. Isolate, investigate, neutralize. The sealed order was new. Red wax, no printed letterhead, just an embossed key over crossed nails. I broke it under the beam of my headlamp while my team finished unloading equipment in the dark courtyard. Object designated Anam 1137, it said. No poetic names, no speculation, just coordinates, containment notes, and a line at the bottom that made the back of my neck prickle. Under no circumstances is the object to be transported to apostolic territory. Destruction in situ is mandated. No exceptions. I'd handled cursed icons, weeping statues rigged with thin tubes, bones that didn't belong to whoever the reliquary claimed. I'd never seen a no-transport order that blunt. "Bad?" asked Carlo, my second, as he swung a case of instruments onto the flagstones. "Short," I said. "They want whatever's down there gone, tonight." He whistled softly. "No study, no samples. Someone upstairs is scared." "Good," I said. "Fear makes them decisive." The monks met us at the cloister gate. They looked the way monks always look. Tired, underfed, half inside this century and half out of it. Their prior, a thin man with two bright eyes, kissed the ring of the diocesan observer who had come along to make everything look canonical and respectable. Nobody shook my hand. They don't know what to do with people like me. They led us into the church, down a side aisle, through a low wooden door that smelled of old incense and damp wool. Behind it, a stone stair curled down into colder air. "Only the prior and I have keys," the bishop said, as if that reassured anyone. "We closed it 3 days ago when the phenomena intensified." "What did you move?" I asked. "What did you touch?" The prior swallowed. "We were clearing a niche for new burials. Brother Paolo struck something that sounded hollow. We found a slab, very old, without inscription. When we lifted it, there was a chamber beneath, and in the middle, on a pedestal," he crossed himself, "a box, like a reliquary, but there was no record, no label. It spoke." "To whom?" "To everyone," he said simply. Each of us heard something different. I heard my own confessor, dead these 20 years. Brother Paolo heard his sister. The youngest novitiate heard his own voice, from when he was a child. The bishop made a small, impatient motion, as if embarrassed by the details. "They have been under strain," he said. "Isolation, overwork. You know how suggestible minds can be in such conditions." I did. I also knew the look in the prior's eyes. I'd seen it in my own reflection once, in a bathroom mirror streaked with candle smoke. Further down, the air changed again, not just colder, thicker, like walking into water. The stone walls sweated in the beam of my lamp. Old frescoes, flaked almost to nothing, watched us pass with eyeless faces. At the bottom, another door waited. This one was new. Raw wood, heavy iron hasp, fresh wax seals impressed with diocesan sigils. Someone had done what they could, as fast as they knew how. I checked the seals, read the prayers written in cramped Latin around the edges. They were the same generic formulas our office had been teaching out to bishops ever since the new norms went out. Request for discernment, plea for protection, disclaimer of responsibility if lay pilgrims got ideas from the internet. Useful enough against hysterics and charlatans. Worthless, I suspected, against whatever warranted a no-transport order. "From here," I said to the bishop and the prior, "nobody comes further down without my say-so. We'll call you if your presence is required." The bishop bristled. "I am the ordinary in this territory, Mr. Rossi," I said. "And down here, Excellence, I am the one who has to live with the consequences if anything goes wrong. Please, let me do my work." He held my gaze a beat too long, then nodded curtly. Pride versus fear. Fear won. It usually does, this close to the dark. We set up a base of operations in the antechamber, folding table, monitoring equipment, improvised altar. Carlo checked electromagnetic readings, and air quality like that would make him feel more anchored. Lucia unpacked relics from padded cases with reverent fingers. Splinters, cloth, vials of oil sealed under glass. I put on gloves and cut the seals from the inner door. The stairs beyond were older than the monastery. You can tell by the way stone wears. Medieval steps dips under years of human feet. These were uneven, edges sharp, like they'd been carved and then forgotten. We went down single file. Every footfall echoed twice, once in my ears, once somewhere behind my sternum. The crypt opened suddenly, a round chamber carved from the rock. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck. The floor was dry and bare, except for a circle of darker stone in the center, 3 meters across, with a squat square pedestal rising from it like a tooth. On the pedestal sat the box. It was smaller than I'd expected, maybe the size of a shoebox, carved from some dark, dense material that drank in the light rather than reflecting it. No hinges, no obvious lid, no iconography, just 4 faces, perfectly smooth, and edges that made my eyes water if I tried to follow them. The prior had called it a reliquary. It didn't feel like one. Relics are about memory, a bone, a garment, a thing that rooted a life in the world's story. This felt more like absence, given shape. Carlos swore under his breath behind me. "That's not right," he said, voice thin under the helmet. He was wrong. It was very right. It was exactly what I'd been waiting to see again without admitting it. Because as soon as I stepped onto the darker stone of the circle, the world slipped. It was subtle. The sound of the others receded, like I'd put on noise-canceling headphones. The cold doubled. Every hair on my arm stood up under the jumpsuit. My headlamp flickered once and then burned steadier than before. Beam locked on the box like the world's most reluctant spotlight. And then it said my name. Not out loud. My ears didn't hear it. My skull did. Daniel. Not in English, not in Italian. In something older that my brain rendered as that one word, the way a translating app renders text for tourists. But the weight of it was the same as the first night. A hand on the back of my neck, turning my face towards something too large to see. I flinched. My boot scraped the stone. Behind me, Carlo murmured, "You okay?" "Fine," I said, too fast. "Stay on the perimeter." The voice, if you could call it that, didn't come again immediately. It didn't have to. The first strike is always just to establish contact. I approached the pedestal. Metrics first. Distance, placement, environment. The dark circle the pedestal rose from wasn't paint. It wasn't a separate slab. It was the same rock as the rest of the floor, heat altered somehow into something glassier, harder. A boundary, not decorative. The box itself had no seams. At least, none my eyes could find. But when I held my gloved hand a few centimeters above it, I felt a faint push, like the static charge you get from an old TV screen. Pressure, not suction. Whatever was inside didn't want out so much as it wanted in. Into me, into everything. My orders were simple. Destruction in situ. There are ways to break things that don't involve hammers. Sacred objects, good and bad, come apart cleanest under ritual stress. Specific psalms, specific configurations of relics, the right order of actions. You can't just throw a cursed icon into a furnace and expect the curse to go with it. Sometimes you just set it free. I ran through the catalog in my head, picking the method that would neutralize something designed to bind, to contain or be contained. It wasn't perfect, nothing we have is, but it was what we did. "Lucia," I said quietly. "Pattern D, no direct contact, tripod, oil, cloth, then seal." She nodded, her face pale but steady. We'd done this dance before, with less exotic partners. We just started unpacking the implements when it spoke again. "Daniel." Same not voice, same weight. But this time it pushed past my name and into the space behind my eyes. Memories cracked open like eggs. I was on the floor of my parents' kitchen again, Miguel's blood under my fingernails. I was in the ambulance, bargaining with the dark. I was in my cheap apartment 4 hours later, drawing a circle on the linoleum with shaking hands. The air had gone thin, the shadows deep, and a cold older than the world had pressed its forehead to the window of my life. "I honored what you asked," Whatever it was had said back then, through the heat shimmer of candle flames and my own sobbing. When I ask in turn, you will open what is closed. At 19, that had sounded abstract. At 19, every promise feels like something your older self will sort out. Standing in the crypt with a box that shouldn't exist, humming silently in a circle that wasn't stone anymore, so much as scar tissue, it stopped being abstract. Daniel. My name wasn't a sound. It was a hook, sunk deep and jerked gently. I closed my eyes for half a heartbeat. When I opened them, nothing had changed. The monks were still at the top of the stairs. Carlo was still pretending not to be afraid. Lucia was still aligning the tripod over the pedestal. I stepped back off the dark stone. The pressure eased. No one else reacted. Change of plan, I said, voice steady because it had to be. We proceed as ordered, but I finish the last phase alone. Carlo, you and Lucia prep the equipment. Do not cross the inner ring. When I say clear, you go topside and tell the bishop we're in the destruction phase. Nobody comes down until I call. Protocol says 2 operators minimum on site for a pattern D, Lucia said. Protocol also says the lead has discretion when new variables appear, I replied. Consider this me exercising it. They didn't like it. They respected it. I stayed in the circle while they worked just outside it, the way you might stand ankle deep in surf while friends set up umbrellas on dry sand. The voice didn't speak again. It didn't need to. It had planted the memory, reminded me of the terms. When everything was in place, the sacramental oil decanted into a shallow dish. The consecrated cloth draped loosely over the tripod's support frame, the prayers on my tongue like old scars. I sent the others away. We'll be 10 meters up by the antechamber, Carlo said, reluctance heavy in every word. Shout if anything feels off. It already feels off, I said. That's why we're here. Their headlamps retreated up the stairs. Their footsteps faded. Silence settled, thick and humming. I was alone with the box. The thing I'd called as a teenager didn't manifest the way cinema teaches you to expect. No smoke, no silhouette, no sulfur. It manifested as an awareness at the very edge of perception, the way you know you're not alone in a dark room, even when you can't see anyone. It had weight, but no outline, presence, but no body. 8 years hadn't made it more human. They'd only made me more fluent in terror. You cut your hand trying to light the match, it said, not from the box, from everywhere. My stomach clenched. Shut up, I said, because sometimes defiance is the only tool you have left. You bled on the circle before you were supposed to, it continued, unbothered. You apologized to no one because you had not yet decided whether you believed in anything that could be offended. You said my name wrong. I answered anyway. I hadn't told anyone those details. Not confessors, not therapists, not the quiet notebooks I kept in hotel rooms between assignments. You promised to open what is closed, it said. Now you stand before what was closed for a long time. Our account is due. I looked at the box. It sat unchanged, featureless, and patient. The pressure in the air grew, pushing against my skin, my teeth, the backs of my eyes. Do you know what this is? I asked. Because if I was going to die or worse, I wanted at least a footnote in the cosmic file. A lock, it said, placed by those who came after. They named themselves after the one they thought was first. He was not. They built their stories on a shallow layer of the deep. Older than God, I murmured. That had been the phrase in the book, in that cheap apartment. Something older than the stories. Older than the voice that said, "Let there be." Older than your word for him, it agreed. You called from the shallows. I answered from beneath. Now I call from beneath a lock made in his name, and you stand above it with the keys you have been given by his servants. All your loyalties gather here. That was the real shape of it. Me, a man with 1 foot in institutional faith and the other in whatever nightmare ecology lay outside it, caught between promises. The box pulsed once, faint as a second heartbeat. Fine lines of light traced themselves along its edges, like hairline fractures backlit by some distant fire. The circle under my feet thrummed in sync. I thought of Miguel, alive and annoyingly healthy, back in our hometown, posts about his kids flooding the family chat. I thought of my parents, who still lit candles in church for a miracle they believed had come with no strings attached. "You touch this lock with your oil and your cloth and your words," the voice said, "and you will not destroy it. You will thin it, soften it, make work for your successors, or you can open it properly, as you promised, and step aside. Destruction in situ is mandated, no exceptions. Orders are simple when you assume the chain of command ends on your side of reality." I realized I was shaking. Not the adrenaline tremor before a fight. The deeper kind, when your bones remember being somewhere colder. If I obeyed Rome, followed the rite, poured blessed oil in the seams I couldn't see, and wrapped the box in consecrated cloth, and recited the Psalms in the right order, maybe, it would be enough. Maybe the lock would crack, the thing inside would bleed out as ash and echoes, and we'd chalk another mark on the board. Or maybe all I'd do was weaken what people far older and braver than me had built, leaving it ripe for the next idiot with a circle and a knife. If I obeyed the thing under the world and opened it on purpose and fully, then whatever it held would step into a planet full of weapons and networks and frightened apes who had already proven they'd sell anything for an edge. Those were the terms. One promise against another. Obedience against survival. I took off my gloves. The air bit my bare fingers like winter metal. "Payment is never about what is fair," the voice said, conversationally. "It is about what was agreed." "I was 19, I said. "You knew what you were doing." "So did you," it said, without malice. "Every bargain is made by the version of you who thinks he will not live long enough to pay it. And yet here you are." I laughed once, a short, broken sound. "If I open this," I said, "what comes out?" "Not me," it said. "Something that was put away briefly while your kind played at Dominion. It remembers being everywhere. It remembers when your oceans were steam. It remembers when your sky was stone. It has no use for you except as paths." "Paths," I repeated. "Channels, tunnels, mouths," it said. "But you know this. You have seen lesser things wearing human shapes." I had, too many times. I placed one hand on the box, skin to impossible material. It was warm, not the warmth of life, the warmth of pressure held for too long. The right thing, my training screamed, was to start the rite, ask for protection, invoke authority, follow procedure, trust the chain. The right thing, my 19-year-old terror whispered, was to keep my brother alive at any cost. The human brain isn't built for decisions like that. It's built to choose between fight and flight, love and fear, not between two flavors of apocalypse. In the end, I did the only thing that made sense to the small, angry part of me that had lit candles in a stolen book. I broke both promises. I didn't open the box. I didn't perform the rite. I did something much stupider. I pushed, not physically, not with hands, with everything I had left that still counted as mine. Belief, fear, years of watching things that were supposed to be metaphors bleed on real floors. I pushed into the pressure, not to crack it open or seal it tighter, but to redirect it, away from the center, away from the surface. You can't unmake a lock built by a civilization. You can't unmake a promise spoken in candlelight, but you can move the fulcrum under them a little. The voice hissed, not in anger, but in surprise. "This is not—" "Shut up," I whispered between my teeth, and for the first time since I was 19, it did. The circle flared under my boots, not with light but with cold so intense it burned. I smelled snow, old stone, something vegetal long since turned to dust. The box vibrated under my palms, edges blurring as if I were looking at it through heat haze. For a moment, a slit appeared along its top face, thin as a paper cut, blacker than any absence I'd ever seen. Something on the other side pressed against it. Not a hand, not a tentacle, just intention. Vast, blind, curious in the way a flood is curious about a valley. I shoved harder. You can't fight something older than gods with muscles, but you can lean your tiny, stubborn existence against where it's trying to push through and say, not here, not like this. I felt something in me tear, not a tendon, not a bone, a way of believing that had held quietly under everything I'd done. The part that trusted there was always someone bigger on my side when I did the right sequence of words and motions. It went, and in the space it left, there was nothing but raw, screaming clarity. I wasn't an agent of God, or of whatever lay under God. I was a man in a hole in the ground, choosing which disaster to delay. The slit in the box snapped shut like an eye. The pressure didn't vanish. It rerouted, down, not up, sideways, not through. The dark circle under my feet cracked in a web of fine lines, not outward, but inward, folding like glass under a slow, heavy hand. When it stopped, I was on my knees, palms stuck to the cooling surface of the box, breath tearing in and out like I'd been running for miles. Silence returned, not the thick, humming kind, the ordinary kind, full of my own ragged breathing and the distant drip of water. The voice came back, but it was weaker now, not because it had less power, but because it had backed off, further into whatever pressure strata it called home. You were not meant to know how to do that, it said, almost curious. Neither were you, apparently, I whispered. My throat hurt. We're even. Debts are not canceled by tantrums, it said. You have complicated the account. Story of my life, I said. I don't know how long I knelt there. Eventually, footsteps pounded on the stairs. Carlo shouted my name from the edge of the circle. Don! I pulled my hands free. The box sat where it had always sat. To untrained eyes, nothing had changed. To mine, everything had. The dark circle was no longer a single sheet of altered stone. It was layered now, striated, like something had melted and recooled in uneven pulses. You good? Carlo asked, voice high with barely contained panic. Yeah, I lied. Phase complete. Get the wrap. We did the ritual then. Oil, cloth, prayers, all by the book. It might still have helped. It might have just been theater. But it gave everyone something to do with their hands. And sometimes that's all that keeps you from screaming. The no transport order meant we couldn't haul the box back to Rome. We sealed it in a cavity we cut into the bedrock under the crypt, layered it with concrete, relics, more concrete. We wrote a report that said, anomaly contained, lock reinforced, risk mitigated. I didn't mention that I'd felt something under the lock twitch when I pushed. I didn't mention the bargain. Back in the city, the division logged the case under the usual anonymized code. The bishop sent a polite note of thanks. The monks went back to chanting in a church that no longer whispered back. I went home, took a shower hot enough to scald, and sat on the floor of my apartment with the lights off, listening for a voice that didn't come. Days passed, weeks, other assignments, other horrors. The world didn't end. No ancient tide boiled up through the cracks I'd shouldered shut. When the voice finally spoke again, it wasn't in a crypt or a dream. It was in the middle of a crowded street, Rome at rush hour, horns blaring, scooters weaving around buses. Daniel, it said, almost amused. You moved the seal. Clever. You bought yourself time. How much? I asked, angrily enough that the woman walking past gave me a funny look. Enough for your brother's children to grow, it said. Enough for your bones to go soft. Enough for the next generation of keepers to decide whether they believe more in orders or in you. That's not an answer, I said. It is the only kind you ever get from anything older than your stories, it said. You have altered the shape of the favor. One day, someone will have to pay the difference. It may not be you. I leaned against a stone wall that had stood since before my ancestors had names and laughed, low and tired. Then I'll make sure they have better training, I said. Traffic washed around me. A siren wailed somewhere near the river. Above the rooftops, the dome of St. Peter's gleamed in the late sun, serene and heavy, as if it had any idea what slept under the rocks that held its weight. I work for men who think their signatures on paper can contain the supernatural. I work in corridors where faith is a protocol and terror is a line item. I know better now. 8 years ago, I summoned something older than God because I was a desperate kid. It wanted a favor returned. It still does. For now, the lock holds. For now, the mountain sleeps. For now, the thing under the world waits, annoyed and curious in equal measure about the little animal that pushed back. I don't know if I won. I don't know if there is such a thing as winning in a game where the other player counts in eons. All I know is this. When it told me to take the seal off the crypt and let an ancient hunger walk, I said no. For a man who once promised the opposite, that has to count for something.